Catherine is going to be the first royal to read one of CBeebies bedtime stories. And these readings always have hidden reference to the persons themselves, so let's see what are those secret clues this time. Welcome back, my body language buddies. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy, and it would be great if you join us by just liking this video, subscribing, and hitting that bell. Let's get down to it. The first question that you might be asking is, how do we know that there is actually any hidden message in Catherine's background? And this is why it's important to take a look at other personalities that have read bedtime stories in this program, just to see if there are any interesting connections. Some of them can be fairly obvious. For example, Tom Hiddleston's bedtime story was about an epic battle between superheroes and villains. And it's really easy to make a connection with his iconic role as Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In Dave Grohl's case, who was Nirvana's drummer and current frontman to Foo Fighters, he read a story written by possibly one of the most famous drummers in history, Ringo Starr. And what's even funnier, the story is about an octopus, which is the creature most commonly associated with this musical instrument. But I noticed in Dave's setting is that besides a guitar, there's a blanket with a rhythmic, almost musical design right behind him. There's also Alice Deering, a British open water swimmer, whose background obviously refers to her swimming life, and the story itself is focused on being brave and courageous, which are traits that you most definitely need when facing open sea waters. And finally, there's Romesh Ranganathan, a comedian who has also made travel documentaries and whose story is about a boy who decides to embark on a journey to meet a real Jedi. So there are enough references to realize that inviting a celebrity or personality to read a bedtime story on CBeebies goes far beyond just having a recognizable face on the screen. There is some kind of relationship, some kind of pattern between the person, what they do, or what we remember them for, and the topic or the motive of the bedtime story itself, not to mention the background. And I've mentioned in other times that we love finding patterns that explain phenomena or help us find an order in the chaos around us. This was essentially a survival skill, like spotting the pattern behind the seasons or predator behaviors, when we suddenly make sense of one part of the chaos around us. Props to the people who produce these short stories, because I'm sure small children will just not notice these references, but adults will. And that's how we're sure that in Catherine's case, there must also be a pattern. And the strongest relationship in all cases has been between the person and the focus of the story itself. Now, Catherine's book is about an owl, the owl who was afraid of the dark, by Jill Tomlinson. The story is about a barn owl called Plop, who is frightened of the dark. The plot is divided into 7 chapters, each covering a night during which Plop learns something new about the dark. Dark is exciting, dark is kind, dark is fun, dark is necessary, dark is fascinating, dark is wonderful, and finally, dark is beautiful. Well, I couldn't help but think that this would totally work as an origin story for Batman, The Dark Knight. Plop is gradually persuaded that the dark has its advantages, and in fact, the book has been recommended for treatment of fear of the dark. But the most relevant clue here is that the story is about an owl. And if I ask you to remember any famous owl from popular culture, most probably you'll come up with examples like Owl from Winnie the Pooh, or Archimedes, who was Merlin's talking companion, or Hedwig from Harry Potter, or Kepora Gebora from The Legend of Zelda, or the unforgettable David Bowie as the Goblin King from Labyrinth, who had the ability to transform into an owl. I'm sure you can come up with other examples, but most probably the ones that you come up with will share 2 common symbolisms with the ones that I mentioned. Owls are symbols of wisdom and magic, and it has to do precisely with the fact that they are night creatures, and that's how the author of the book juggles with the contrasting idea of an owl that is afraid of the dark or the mysterious. That's one of the reasons Catherine appeared to be sitting on a garden at night. The fact that she's not sitting on a chair like most other personalities reading these stories do, but instead on the blanket right on the grass, gives the sensation that you've gone out camping. That is to reinforce the fact that she's surrounded by that mysterious darkness. Well, one of the perks of the dark, which is actually in the story, is that you can see the stars. We've got a telescope to the left of the frame, for that matter. The fact that it looks rather old, it gives you the idea that it has been used for tens or maybe hundreds of years. Makes you wonder how many eyes would have searched the sky for so many nights to make sense of the patterns of stars and constellations. But an old device also gives the idea of tradition, of an instrument passed through generations. And that's a concept that is about to be relevant. And you see that we come back to the concept of patterns and making sense of the chaos around us and how we feel good when we find order in everything that is going on with our circumstances. I think that is the main bridge or topic that Catherine wanted to project with her bedtime story. The owl's life is the dark itself, but this owl in particular is afraid of the unknown, of that uncertainty. And that is a great analogy for the strange times we've been through in the last couple years. If it's hard for adults to keep our mental health on check, you can imagine that it is very difficult for small children to understand all that has been happening in their tiny world. Again, this underlying message is not for small children, but rather for their parents. And this image of Catherine sitting in what looks like a garden, outdoors at night, is something that after so many lockdowns, most people really need these days. Even the hut that is behind Catherine is made of wood and has purple light that, on one hand, is a lot like the brand image of the bedtime stories themselves, but purple is another symbol for mystery and magic. But let's go back to the wisdom, the other symbol of the owl. And wisdom is something that you don't develop overnight, but most of the time learning to react to your circumstances and try to find the perks or the benefits of what you are going through, even if at first sight your circumstances are not ideal. Pretty much like the owl of the story, who learns to find beauty in darkness, keeping in mind that night and day are going to be a constant cycle that never stops. This also reminds me of that Rabindranath Tagore quote, "If you cry because the sun has gone out of your life, your tears will prevent you from seeing the stars." You can always take things to the extreme and take this kind of quotes to romanticize suffering. What you really want to take from this kind of messages is that you cannot control your circumstances, but you can control how you react to them. And this is how you build not only wisdom, but also character. And we could define character as the mental and moral qualities distinctive to an individual. It's not that hard to picture that in the royal family we got a great example of character. That is Her Majesty the Queen. With her service for so many years, she's become a cornerstone of British spirit and grit. And the Queen is also a symbol of tradition, which goes hand in hand with the ancient telescope we can see in Catherine's background. This book is a tiny compass that points in the direction of building character. That no matter the circumstances, how overwhelming they might be, and regardless of the odds against us, we can find beauty, we can find solace, and we can ultimately find the grit to push until we learn to transform those apparently bad circumstances into an advantage. And that is something that we all need to learn. If you want to refine your observation skills, all you'll have to do is download my 100 body language tips right in the description of this video. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas and it will always be a pleasure, my body language buddies. Much love and bliss.